Imagine yourself stepping into a cozy living room on a crisp autumn evening. The fireplace is crackling. There's a slight chill in the air, and you're eager to settle in for a story that fuses humor, heartache, and old-school showbiz charm. Tonight, our tale revolves around the remarkable life and times of McLean Stevenson, a man whose on-screen persona brought more smiles than tears, but whose off-screen journey took more unexpected turns than anyone could have imagined. So grab yourself a cup of something warm and get comfortable, because this is one of those Hollywood stories that feels both intimately personal and grandly legendary, complete with dramatic triumphs, heartfelt reflections, and the ever-present question of what might have been. McLean Stevenson was born November 14, 1927 in Normal, Illinois, which, let's be honest, might sound like a comedic setup in itself. Normal, Illinois is literally the name of a town, and for a boy destined to become a comedic performer, you couldn't ask for a quirkier launching pad. He grew up just a few miles away in Bloomington, Illinois, part of a family that was well regarded and somewhat politically prominent in certain circles. In fact, the Stevenson name was more than just a convenient brand for future show business endeavors. It was deeply tied to American politics. McLean was related to Adlai E. Stevenson, who served as vice president under Grover Cleveland in the late 19th century. And even more notably, McLean was the second cousin, once removed, to Adlai E. Stevenson II, the two-time presidential nominee who went head-to-head with Dwight D. Eisenhower in the 1950s. Right from the beginning, there was a touch of national importance about the Stevenson family. It wasn't that McLean was strolling around the White House corridors as a toddler, but there's something about having those kinds of connections that shapes your worldview. It gave him a certain comfort in front of crowds, not to mention a love for conversation and a knack for quick-witted responses. Necessary traits for both politicians and comedians. His father, Edgar, was a cardiologist, certainly a stable, respectable profession if ever there was one, and the Stevenson family lived a life that was modestly comfortable but not extravagantly privileged. The middle name McLean came from his paternal grandmother, Lottie McLean, and somehow that suited him perfectly in later life. Something about the name McLean feels cozy and genial, a vibe that became a hallmark of his performances. He had a younger sister, Ann Whitney, who, as fate would have it, would also find her way into the world of acting, though her roles would rarely achieve the front and center status her brother enjoyed. Ann's path would eventually take her to appearances in big-name productions like Home Alone and The Wonder Years, but her story is intertwined with McLean's in a way that speaks volumes about familial creativity and that intangible spark that pushes siblings onto stage and screen. Now, long before McLean Stevenson ever discovered the stage, he served a brief stint in the U.S. Navy in the late 1940s. World War II had ended not long before, and while the draft and the grand-scale mobilization of young men was winding down, many still chose or were guided into military service. Perhaps this small taste of military life would later help him bring that authentic touch to the beloved role he'd make so famous. Henry Blake, the laid-back commanding officer in MASH. Though his time in the Navy didn't match the comedic anarchy of a TV set, it probably offered him a glimpse of the camaraderie and occasional chaos found in life-and-death environments. After his Navy service, he enrolled at Northwestern University, a prestigious institution located near Chicago, which houses one of the country's most respected theater arts programs. While many comedic actors and performers get their start in smaller drama schools or local theaters, McLean was fortunate enough to receive top-tier training. Something about Northwestern's approach, particularly in the mid-20th century, nurtured students with a sense of intellectual curiosity and a desire to challenge the status quo. This aligned perfectly with McLean's comedic instincts. He was witty, but always layered with an undercurrent of warmth and gentle irreverence. Still, even with a degree in theater arts, life didn't immediately open the red carpet doors of Hollywood for him. Like many actors, he spent years dabbling in a plethora of odd jobs. Imagine him in an insurance office, trying to crack jokes between policy discussions, or peddling medical supplies with that classic Stevenson grin. He even worked at a radio station, a job that surely must have felt more aligned with his personality, offering an early taste of broadcasting, comedic timing, and improvisation. He also donned clown makeup on a Dallas TV show, performing for local audiences who likely had no idea they were witnessing a future sitcom star in the making. In some ways, it's that patchwork of experiences that fuels a truly versatile performer. When you've sold insurance, juggled clown gigs, and hustled your comedic talents at a radio station, you accumulate a treasure trove of real-world experiences that can be drawn upon for authentic performance later on. Now, remember that political connection we mentioned? Adlai Stevenson's campaigns in the 1950s needed a press secretary who could, among other things, deliver a quick, engaging quip at any moment. And that job fell to McLean. It was a combination of comedic flair, political savvy, and the Stevenson surname that made him a perfect fit. He hit the campaign trail, possibly shaking hands, cracking jokes, and stumping for votes, all while learning how to keep an audience engaged, skills that are every bit as important in show business as they are in politics. Adlai's network stretched into influential circles in New York, and while traveling for campaign events, McLean found himself rubbing shoulders with some of the biggest figures in entertainment. Show business, like politics, thrives on relationships, and one introduction can open a multitude of doors. For McLean, these connections lit a spark in his mind. Maybe this performing thing was more than just a side hustle. Fast forward to his 30s. McLean Stevenson made a pivotal decision. He was going to transition officially from a dabbler in comedic gigs to a full-on comedic actor. This was no small leap, especially as he was already older than many fresh-faced performers who had been pounding the pavement in New York and Los Angeles for years. But that late start might have actually worked in his favor, granting him a certain maturity and real-world perspective that seasoned his humor with something more genuine and accessible. To sharpen his craft, McLean studied at the American Musical and Dramatic Academy, where some of the most legendary acting coaches, like Sanford Meisner and Lee Strasberg, were shaping the next generation of performers. Meisner was known for his technique that encouraged living truthfully in imaginary circumstances, focusing on impulsive responses and authenticity of emotion. Strasberg championed method acting, urging performers to tap into personal memories and experiences. Putting these two influences together, you might get a comedic performer who could instantly pivot from breezy, off-the-cuff hilarity to a heartfelt, emotionally resonant portrayal. Precisely the combination that would make McLean Stevenson such a compelling actor. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, he honed his comedic timing in nightclubs and summer stock theaters. Nightclubs in that era were bustling hubs of entertainment. The microphone, the smoky room, and the raw, immediate reactions of the audience. Summer stock theater, on the other hand, was typically performed in rural or vacation-friendly locales, offering a more relaxed atmosphere. But both environments demanded versatility from performers. One night you might be performing a comedic number, the next you might be in a small drama. It all contributed to Stevenson's evolving skill set. By 1962, he landed his Broadway debut in The Music Man alongside Robert Preston. For anyone who spent years hustling to break into show business, that moment, Standing on a Broadway stage hearing the opening bars of the orchestra must have felt electrifying. And for McLean, it was validation that he was indeed a force to be reckoned with on stage. It wasn't long before television came calling. By the mid-1960s, McLean had begun writing comedy material for shows like the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour and Tommy Smothers' organic primetime space ride. The Smothers Brothers were known for their edgy, satirical humor that pushed boundaries on television, often getting them in hot water with network censors. Contributing to that brand of comedy meant McLean was developing a sense of humor that was both mainstream enough to be appealing, but edgy enough to provoke thought and generate buzz. He also made appearances in sketches on The Ed Sullivan Show, which was a behemoth of entertainment during that era. If you were on Ed Sullivan's stage, it meant you had the potential to reach millions of households across America. So imagine an Illinois boy with a comedic twinkle in his eye, standing before a national audience, comedic resume in hand, looking to carve out a distinctive space in the entertainment world. Yet his real break in television came in 1969 when he landed a major role on the Doris Day Show playing Michael Nicholson. Doris Day was America's sweetheart, known for her sunny persona and golden voice, and her show was a prime opportunity for McLean to exhibit his comedic chops in a warm family setting. Over 2 seasons, audiences got a taste of Stevenson's likable, sometimes bumbling, but always charming style. You could say it was a warm-up act for what would later become the most iconic role of his career, preparing him for the comedic demands and the widespread attention that would soon come knocking. By 1972, McLean Stevenson got cast as Lieutenant Colonel Henry Blake in the television series MASH. The series was set during the Korean War, but was widely interpreted as a commentary on the ongoing Vietnam War, blending comedic hijinks with sobering reflections on the realities of conflict. The character of Henry Blake was a somewhat absent-minded, fishing-obsessed commanding officer of the 4077 Mobile Army Surgical Hospital. He was the guy who always had a goofy grin on his face, a fishing hat perched at a haphazard angle, and a naive belief that maybe, despite the insanity around him, life could be manageable if he just stayed friendly. The humor in Henry Blake's role was contrasted against the life-or-death stakes of a wartime surgical unit, providing an unexpected but deeply effective comedic relief for the audience. It was an overnight cultural phenomenon. MASH skyrocketed in the ratings, and McLean found himself at the epicenter of a show that would go on to become one of the most beloved comedies in television history. While Alan Alda's Hawkeye Pierce was undeniably the show's main comedic protagonist, Henry Blake became the emblem of kindly leadership, not entirely competent in a military sense, but deeply compassionate and well-meaning. It was the perfect environment for McLean's laid-back comedic approach. He won the 1974 Golden Globe Award for Best Supporting Actor, but more importantly, he'd become a household name. Even now, decades later, many can still recall Henry Blake's trademark fishing cap, or the easy laugh he'd share in the mess tent, or those comedic moments when he'd bungle military protocol in a way that was endearing rather than embarrassing. Along the way, McLean also had opportunities to flex his creativity behind the scenes. He wrote an episode titled The Trial of Henry Blake, further showcasing his comedic perspective while weaving in the dramatic elements that define the show's unique tone. He pitched the story idea for the Army-Navy game, which garnered him an Emmy nomination. These contributions reflected not only his comedic brilliance, but his desire to participate fully in shaping the characters and stories. This was a creative environment in which he thrived until he didn't. Despite the tremendous success of MASH, There was a growing frustration within McLean that he was perpetually playing second fiddle to Alan Alda's Hawkeye. Alda's character was the charismatic, often heroic figure, while Henry Blake was the likable but less central commanding officer. For an actor who'd spent years honing his craft with aspirations for center stage glory, it started to feel constraining. So after 3 seasons, McLean Stevenson made the fateful decision to leave MASH in search of leading man roles. In an industry famed for cautionary tales of actors leaving wildly successful shows too soon, Stevenson's departure would become one of the most legendary examples. Many who had been in that position might have stuck it out for the guaranteed paycheck, the accolades, the stability, but McLean was at heart a risk-taker. He believed that the audience love for Henry Blake might translate into audience love for McLean Stevenson in other projects. When the show's producers heard of his decision to exit, they decided to craft one of the most shocking send-offs in television history. In the season 3 finale, Abyssinia Henry Blake is honorably discharged, bidding farewell to the 4077 with tears, laughter, and an expectant heart. But then came the gut punch. The episode ends with Radar O'Reilly, Gary Berghoff, entering the operating room to deliver a devastating announcement. Henry's plane had been shot down over the Sea of Japan, with no survivors. This was not the typical comedic meltdown or a graceful off-screen farewell. It was raw, it was tragic, and it was a seismic jolt to viewers. Most of the cast themselves had not been warned about the final twist, so when you watch that scene, you see genuine shock and heartbreak etched on their faces. Viewer backlash was immediate and intense. Letters poured in. People protested that television comedy shouldn't delve into such grim territory. But in the broader context of television history, it cemented MASH's reputation as a show unafraid to confront the realities of war and the fragility of life. Henry Blake's death became a defining moment not just for MASH, but for the landscape of TV storytelling in general. For Stevenson, that meant launching into a new era of his career. Having left behind a beloved role, he signed a high-profile deal with NBC. The network, hoping to capitalize on his charm and comedic instincts, aimed to develop star vehicles that would replicate, if not surpass, the success he'd enjoyed on MASH. The results, unfortunately, were a series of short-lived sitcoms that never found firm footing with audiences or critics. First came The McLean Stevenson Show, 1976 to 1977, an attempt at a family sitcom revolving around his amiable dad persona, but it struggled to capture the comedic lightning in a bottle that MASH had. Then came In the Beginning, 1978, a sitcom that cast McLean as a Catholic priest, but it ended after a handful of episodes. Hello, Larry, 1979 to 1980, often mocked for its formulaic feel, had him portraying a radio psychiatrist in Portland, Oregon, and quickly earned a reputation as a punchline about failed spin-offs and second tries. Condo, 1983, was a culture clash sitcom that also didn't stick. Critics, audiences, and even network executives started echoing the sentiment that there was something missing when Stevenson wasn't playing Henry Blake, and McLean himself would one day reflect, "I made the mistake of believing people were enamored of McLean Stevenson, but they were really enamored of Henry Blake." Still, Hollywood is a place that loves to keep its recognizable faces in circulation. Even when starring roles failed to catch on, Stevenson became a fixture on game shows like Match Game, where his genial humor made him a crowd favorite. He also appeared on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson an impressive 58 times as a guest host, and guest an indication of how warmly he was regarded in show business. He was the go-to guy if you needed someone affable, quick-witted, and reliably entertaining. Guest roles followed in shows like The Love Boat and The Golden Girls, and he even made appearances in the short-lived TV adaptation of Dirty Dancing in 1988 to 1989. Despite the mainstream success evading him, you couldn't say he wasn't busy, and you definitely couldn't say he wasn't beloved by those who worked with him. Part of McLean Stevenson's narrative became a cautionary tale for actors everywhere. If you have a role in a smash hit show, especially one as culturally significant as MASH, maybe don't give it up too quickly in the hope of something bigger. Critics went so far as to coin the phrase the McLean Stevenson Award for actors who leave successful series prematurely, only to watch their subsequent opportunities fizzle out. It's harsh, but it's also a testament to just how big MASH was and how central Henry Blake had been to its initial success. While all this was happening, Stevenson's personal life was also weaving in and out of the limelight. He was married 3 times. His first marriage to Carrie Williamson in 1951 lasted until 1979, and together they had a daughter, Lindsay. His second marriage to Louise Herbert was brief, from 1980 to 1981, before he finally settled with Ginny Fosdick in 1985, remaining with her until his death. They had a son, Jeffrey. Throughout these personal chapters, McLean's affable personality and comedic sensibility remained core aspects of who he was, but as anyone who's tried marriage a few times knows, it can be a winding road. The real McLean, a loving father, a doting husband, a warm presence, stood in slight contrast to the comedic persona audiences saw. Yet in many ways, that comedic persona was just an extension of his genuine kindness. He was known to volunteer regularly at the Children's Burn Foundation in Sherman Oaks, California, where he'd brighten the spirits of young patients. Those who encountered him there described a man whose comedic gifts went hand in hand with a gentle capacity for empathy. As the 1980s gave way to the 1990s, Stevenson continued to make occasional appearances, never hitting the dizzying heights of MASH again, but seemingly content with the recognition and the opportunities that still came his way. Then, in the mid-1990s, he was diagnosed with bladder cancer. Despite this difficult diagnosis, he continued working, never losing his sense of humor. He underwent treatment with the quiet resilience that he had always shown when it came to navigating his career and his personal endeavors. But life would deal him one final tragic twist. On February 15, 1996, while recovering from surgery at Encino-Tarzana Regional Medical Center, he suffered a fatal heart attack at the age of 68. The heart attack was unrelated to his cancer and shocked both family and fans who had been expecting him to come through his post-surgical recovery. In another eerie coincidence that could have been scripted by Hollywood, Roger Bowen, the actor who had played Henry Blake in the 1970 film version of MASH, died from a heart attack just 1 day later, on February 16, 1996. It was as if the universe had decided to bookend the character's existence in a single, inexplicable moment of synchronicity. After his death, McLean Stevenson was cremated and his ashes interred at Forest Lawn, Hollywood Hills Cemetery in Los Angeles, an iconic final resting place for many in the entertainment industry. Family, friends, and fans mourned him as more than just Henry Blake. They mourned a man whose off-screen kindness had touched as many lives as his on-screen comedic gifts. Tributes poured in from co-stars and colleagues. Loretta Swit, who played the iconic Major Margaret Hot Lips Houlihan on MASH, called Stevenson the heart of the early years, praising his endless good humor and the natural warmth he brought to the set. Alan Alda, whose prominence on MASH had been a point of contention for Stevenson, described him as possessing a genuine warmth. suggesting that while creative frustrations may have arisen behind the scenes, mutual respect endured. And for those who loved him as Henry Blake, that resonance continued. Every time a MASH rerun aired, whether it was the comedic hijinks of Henry fishing in the company clerk's office or the heart-wrenching final moments of his departure, audiences were reminded of the tender comedic brilliance of McLean Stevenson. His legacy remains a fascinating study in the complexities of show business success. Yes, he is the poster child for leaving a beloved series too soon, but that oversimplifies a much deeper story. He was an actor who believed in his own potential so fiercely that he risked everything to pursue it. He was a man who loved entertaining and making people smile, whether on a big hit show, a short-lived sitcom, or a game show panel. He was an individual with enough heart to volunteer to cheer up burned children, proving that sometimes the humor we see on screen is just a reflection of an even bigger heart off-screen. Henry Blake's death on MASH would go down in history as one of the earliest moments when a sitcom confronted mortality head-on, shaking audiences from their assumption that comedic characters are untouchable. It paved the way for other shows to blend comedic tones with more serious themes, pushing the boundaries of what television comedy could do. For that alone, McLean Stevenson's influence is baked into the DNA of modern TV. Today's comedies can shift from laughter to tears in a single scene without disorienting the audience. Shows like Scrubs, or even more modern dramedies that walk the line between heartbreak and hilarity, owe a small part of their narrative freedom to that fateful moment when Henry Blake's plane was shot down, leaving an operating room of stunned silence. And yet through it all, the image of McLean Stevenson that remains strongest is that of a genial, approachable everyman who seemed to belong in your living room. He was the friend you could trust to make you chuckle when life felt heavy, the father figure who bumbled his way through comedic crises but never lost his heart. Even in his lesser-known sitcom attempts, that inherent warmth was always present, a through line in every performance he gave. For those who knew him personally, the difference between the man and the character he portrayed wasn't so large. The comedic timing, the charming grin, the twinkle in his eye, they were genuine. Despite career setbacks and the occasional internal wrestling over decisions made, there's little doubt that McLean Stevenson left an indelible mark on everyone he encountered. He was never short on self-awareness, freely admitting later that maybe it was a mistake to leave MASH so soon. But he never let regret overshadow the pride he felt for having been part of something truly special. His presence in those early episodes gave the series a bright, almost whimsical undertone that gradually shifted into more serious fare in later seasons. Some fans still argue that the show changed irreversibly after Henry Blake's tragic exit, that it grew a bit darker, a bit more introspective without the clueless yet soft-hearted commanding officer to anchor the comedic side. Others celebrate the show's evolution, crediting that shocking moment for elevating MASH beyond a mere sitcom into a cultural phenomenon with real emotional depth. Today, you can still find references to Henry Blake in pop culture, whether it's in comedic sketches that pay homage to that infamous death scene or in think pieces about the greatest and most shocking TV farewells. McLean Stevenson might not have realized it at the time, but by agreeing to that exit storyline, he was also writing himself into television history. If he'd quietly disappeared, perhaps transferred to Tokyo or retired to Illinois, the impact wouldn't have been as memorable. By making Henry Blake's end so abrupt and tragic, the show's producers ensured that Stevenson's name would forever evoke a particular brand of comedic pathos. Perhaps that's not the legacy he initially envisioned, but it's certainly a form of immortality in the entertainment world, Looking back on his final years, it's notable how, even as health challenges arose, he remained engaged with creative pursuits. Those close to him say he never truly lost that spark, that ability to see the funny side of almost any situation. The heartbreak of losing him so suddenly to a heart attack was magnified by how it happened during a recovery from surgery, when everyone was cautiously optimistic. It was a shock that lingered among his circle of friends, and that sense of disbelief was compounded when Roger Bowen passed away the very next day. The two men who had both portrayed Henry Blake in different mediums dying in the same 24-hour span felt like an eerie cosmic punctuation mark on the life of a character that united them. So here we are, at the close of our story about a man who left an indelible impression, both on television and in the hearts of those who encountered him. McLean Stevenson was more than just Lieutenant Colonel Henry Blake, yet the legacy of that role is interwoven with the rest of his life in ways both wonderful and haunting. He reminds us that every choice in an entertainment career carries risk, that success is never as simple as it appears, and that sometimes the most memorable characters are the ones who leave us too soon. As we turn off the metaphorical spotlight and let the curtain fall on this account of McLean Stevenson's life, let's hold on to the sense of warmth and humor he brought into the world. In an industry fueled by fame, fortune, and fierce competition, his story stands as a gentle reminder that at its core, show business, and indeed life, belongs to those who embrace it with an open heart, a ready laugh, and the courage to keep going, even when things don't go exactly as planned. Whenever we think of him, we can't help but smile, maybe shedding a bittersweet tear for a talent that moved on when there was more left to explore, but who still left behind something irreplaceable. Whether as the gregarious host, the comedic clown in that earlier Dallas show, the volunteer lifting children's spirits, or the conscientious press secretary on the campaign trail, he always had a story to tell, a joke to share. And that, dear viewers and listeners, is the kind of legacy that no controversy, no early departure, and no unexpected twist of fate can ever truly erase.